evening. I'm going to call to order the Burnsville Planning Commission for Monday, July 8th, 2019. Welcome, everybody, on this beautiful summer evening. Our first item on the agenda is adoption of the agenda. And Ms. Garros, I think you have some changes to explain.
Yes, thank you. For the commissioners and the public out there, the agenda packet that was sent out last week had the incorrect order for the agenda items. It since has been corrected, so those tuning in and looking at it now it is corrected. But for the purposes of just making sure we're looking at things correctly, what we'd like to do is modify the order so that item 4, which is the approval of the minutes, gets placed right after the adoption of the agenda. And then item 5, updates, would be placed at the bottom of the agenda. Those are the only changes.
Are those clear? Well, I would entertain a motion. It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to item 2, which is approval of the minutes from the May 28th, 2019 meeting. Any changes from staff on that or commissioners?
Changes from staff?
All right, I would entertain a motion. It's been moved. Is there a second? Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to oath of office for our new planning commissioners, Chris John and Ali Awad. Did I say that right? Okay, good. Welcome. Congratulations on your appointment. Ms. Arnold will administer the oath of office. Very officially.
All right, Chris, you can come up here first. Okay, so you'll raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Christopher John, do solemnly swear
I, Christopher John, do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and of the state of Minnesota,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the state of Minnesota,
and faithfully will discharge the duties as a member of the Burnsville Planning Commission of the city of Burnsville,
and faithfully will discharge the duties as a member of the Burnsville Planning Commission of the city of Burnsville
in the county of Dakota and state of Minnesota,
in the county of Dakota and the state of Minnesota,
to the best of my judgment and ability,
to the best of my judgment and ability,
so help me God.
so help me God.
Thank you. If you will sign here. Sorry, this one. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's fine.
Thank you. Okay. I, Ali Awad, do solemnly swear
I, Ali Awad, do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and of the state of Minnesota,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the state of Minnesota,
and faithfully will discharge the duties
and faithfully will discharge the duties
as a member of the Burnsville Planning Commission of the city of Burnsville,
as a member of the Burnsville Planning Commission of the city of Burnsville,
in the county of Dakota and state of Minnesota,
in the county of Dakota and state of Minnesota,
to the best of my judgment and ability,
to the best of my judgment and ability.
so help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you. If you will sign here. Thank you.
All right, congratulations. You're official now. That moves us then to item 4, which is election of chair and vice chair. This is something we have to do every year, obviously. Is there a motion? We'll start with chair.
I would like to make a motion to re-elect Commissioner Wolter as the chair of the Planning Commission.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Feel free to. If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That takes us then to the position of vice chair. Is there a motion
I'd like to make a motion.
Commissioner Timmerman?
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to elect Erica Henderson to the Vice Chair of the Burnsville Planning Commission.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. We're legal for another year. All right, that brings us then to item 5, which is a public hearing on the application of Industrial Equities Group LLC for a conditional use permit for retaining walls and building height variance for landscaping and signs to construct a new 81,000 square foot office warehouse building at 250 River Ridge Circle North. Ms. Garros.
Thank you, Commissioners. Oops. As the chair had identified, we have an application tonight for Industrial Equities Group LLC. They're seeking two different things, conditional use permit approval and also a variance. We'll get into the particulars as we move along, but the conditional use permit is to allow retaining walls to exceed 8 feet in height. The ordinance has a standard that when they're in a rear or side yard, they're taller than 8 feet. It can be approved, but they need the conditional use permit review. The second is to allow building height to exceed 35 feet. This is very common in our commercial and industrial zones, and the applicant is proposing to have a little bit taller building than 35 feet, and again, the ordinance allows that with a conditional use permit. Conditional use permit, just for everyone, your background is that they are considered to be uses that are allowed by the ordinance, but you would be taking a look at those things to determine if there are any negative impacts or perceived negative impacts to adjacent properties in the neighborhood. And then if so, with the conditional use permit, you can apply conditions to mitigate those issues. The second part of the application is a variance. A variance is a little bit different than a conditional use permit. A variance is something when you're requesting a deviation from a performance standard of the ordinance. And in this, the state statute provides that there needs to be a demonstration that there's a practical difficulty in order to justify the granting of a variance. In here, there are two variances being requested. One is for landscaping to reduce the number of shrubs, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Second is for setbacks for the proposed freestanding sign. The subject site is a vacant lot. It's located right overlooking I-35W. Highway 13 is to the south. We have had recent applications and reviewed in the last year Darussalam at this point. This is River Ridge Circle. And there's an existing office warehouse that's located directly abutting to the east, another office warehouse to the south. And then to the north, this is all one parcel that is the Walmart property. So it gives you kind of an overview of the area. Better Business Bureau is an office building located then directly across the street. In terms of site zoning, the property is zoned B3, which is our general business zoning district. And then there are other B3 zone parcels along River Ridge Circle. Walmart is zone B4, which is a highway commercial and a planned unit development. In terms of the history of this property, it's somewhat unique. It's been platted for a long, long time, and also has been developed previously. 1973, Howard Johnson's Motel and Restaurant was built there and existed there for a long time. Then in 2005, it changed to Fanta Suites, and there have been other hotels in there kind of during that time frame. The building was taken down, so now the property is vacant, and in 2008, there was actually city council review and approval for this site to have a 2-lot subdivision and planned unit development. It was to be developed with 2 separate office buildings. However, the PUD legal documents were never signed by the applicant. 2008 was right before the recession hit, and I think that this was really a matter associated with that. In addition to that, the plat was never filed. So the legal descriptions rezoning the property to PUD aren't really valid because they don't exist because the plat was never filed and is now null and void. The situation with the property is also somewhat unique. It was platted into two separate pieces, even back in 1963. When you take a look at the old aerial photos, really, it's kind of interesting, but these lines really represent separation from the hotel, from the restaurant at one point in time, but they are still two existing parcels. Now, in order for the applicant to be able to build on this and not have any issues with crossing common lot lines with both the zoning and also building code, they will need to combine these two separate pieces into one lot, and that is one of the conditions. In terms of the subject site itself, the certificate of survey was provided. There is steep slopes and very steep slopes located along the periphery on the north and the west. In addition, there are some existing trees, mostly in the slope areas of the site. They do have existing on the site. This was a former turnaround that's still gravel. There were two accesses to the site for both the restaurant and the hotel, and there will be some changes and modifications due to that. But the steep slopes in this area really are issues for the site. There's nothing that you can really do or is allowed in terms of grading of those steep slope areas. For the proposal, what's proposed is a new office warehouse building, about 81,000 square feet, split 50-50 into office and warehouse. Basically, each of the offices will also have warehouse space for them. The way that the site is set up is that all of the loading bays will be located on the easterly side of the building. And again, this faces the side of this other office warehouse building, just to the east. And then they do have a parking lot for 167 vehicles located around the periphery of the building. And the other thing of note is there are existing overhead power lines. However, they're not located within the easement. The NSP easement is along the north property line, and only part of this power line is located within that. So there is a condition that the applicant obtain approval from the utility company that they are okay with the proposal as shown, and if needed, either the utility line should be relocated back into the easement or a new easement be provided. In terms of the site area, it's 5.7 acres. Maximum building height is 35 feet. They're proposing to have parapet walls that are a little bit taller than 36 feet 6 inches. We didn't want to get into a situation where we're showing things too close that would be an issue, so we're just saying the building height is about 38 feet, which would be plenty for them to be able to continue with the project as proposed. The building area, as I said, is 81,000 square feet. Impervious surface coverage, this site is not within a shoreline district. It's 68%, and there are no issues with that. In terms of their green space, they are proposing more green space overall and within the parking lot and building perimeter green space than what the ordinance standards are. So they are exceeding in all of those cases. And the parking that's proposed meets the ordinance as far as the number of parking spaces. This slide identifies the site plan and the details. I know they're a little bit hard to see on the screen, but basically the information that we went over. In addition to that, I just wanted to make note in the upper right-hand corner, they are providing a sightline survey. And when taken from view of the circle here, what this is showing is that with the existing parapet and the walls, you will not be able to see any rooftop equipment located from that site. So they have provided that. This also gives a little bit more detail on the primary entrances to the building. There are 3 main entrances on the west side of the building, and there are details as to how these are to be constructed. Much larger entry features in terms of a lot of glass, and those do also meet the ordinance. In addition to that, There is the sign, I'll bring it up on another slide, but the sign is proposed out in this area of the site here, right next to the lot line, and then this is a 10-foot setback. This is the floor plan, again showing all of the loading bays on the east. There's also one loading bay on the north and one on the south. On the right-hand side of the floor plan, this is what I was talking about in terms of these entrance vestibules, how they are going to be constructed both on the corners and then the internal one at about midpoint of the building. This is related to the building height CUP, as I had indicated. They do have this elevation here at 136 feet, 6 inches. We did not, with the latest set of plans, get paper plans to scale, so we just wanted to make sure that the height is covered. That's why we're recommending or identifying the height at 38 feet. It's probably a little bit less than that, but that should make sure that they're able to construct what they would like to and still follow the CUP. In terms of the overall site grading plan, the areas that are dark are these areas of steep slope, which would be between 18 and over 40%, the darkest being the most steep areas of the slopes. What they are proposing to do basically is to utilize every part of the site that they can that's outside of those steep slope areas. There's very little grading that's proposed in terms of the slopes. They're really trying to stay out of that. But in order to do that, they have the need for quite tall retaining walls. The retaining wall, the longest one is on the north side and then continues along the parking lot along the west side, and that retaining wall in about the midpoint over here is 13.1 feet tall at its highest point. So because of that, they are requesting the conditional use permit. There's not an issue as far as staff is concerned with that height. In Burnsville, we do have hilly terrain, and we have retaining walls all over the place at varying heights. So this is not out of the realm of what's been approved previously. One of the items that we are including as a condition is that whenever the retaining walls are 5 feet or taller, that they place a safety fence along the top of those. Let's see here. And on this screen, what we're seeing here is they're proposing to put in heavier lift of asphalt, if you will, to accommodate all the truck loading. So that's what this is demonstrating in this area. The rest of the area will be paved just as a normal commercial project site. And what this also shows is they will be eliminating this entrance, and there will just be one access now to the site. It does meet all of the requirements in terms of turning radius, backup, and loading requirements. As far as site drainage is considered, at first they were looking at potentially putting a stormwater pond over here. Instead, what they have decided to do, and this does meet the ordinance, is they're proposing 2 underground stormwater systems, infiltration systems. The largest one is on the west part of the site, and there will also be one on the east, and then those will be piped to the city's stormwater facilities, which are located in River Ridge Circle. Also, they'll be bringing in utilities from River Ridge, those are city utilities for full sewer, sanitary sewer and water services. This is just another illustration, a little bit more detail about the infiltration areas and what's proposed. In terms of the exterior materials, we do have the samples of the exterior materials are here adjacent to the wall for what is proposed. We did want to note that the materials do meet the ordinance standards for exterior materials. However, the graphic that was provided, the colors are a little bit darker than what is actually proposed. And I just wanted you to note that. And you can see the areas on the corners. This would be the west elevation where you've got the larger entry vestibule, and that's the same on this end. And then also the larger entry in the west central part of the building. So all of these are in excess of the minimum requirements for glass and entry features. The proposal does also meet the design features standards of the ordinance, so everything is met, and no changes are requested to materials requirements. We also included in your packet the architectural review tool, which addresses in more detail the exterior materials and their components. Just generally, for exterior materials, they're proposing basically a darker bronze capping, metal capping that's located along the top of the building. There are differences in the parapet height. They're only about a 1 foot difference, but there are differences in the height as shown. The taller parapets are going to be the 36.6 foot height, and then the others will be 1 foot shorter than that. So overall, it will meet the ordinance. There are no issues in terms of building height. They're also looking at 2 different types of face brick, and these are exterior materials that will be accent materials. The majority of the building will be the precast aggregate concrete panels, and then they will have stone that's this lighter tan color in these locations, and then they'll have different brick at the top and then at this location as well. So these are the overall materials. In terms of the windows, they will be a bronze tinted glass, and there'll be champagne color around the frames for windows and doors. In terms of existing tree cover, there are some trees that are located in the northwest corner. The ones that are shown to be removed have the X through them. There are not many that will be removed. Most of these are volunteer growth type trees. We did take a look, and they did provide their tree preservation security has already been provided. We also issued their tree removal permit. They can do that before project approval, so if you've seen some work out there, that's what that's related to. In terms of variance considerations, I talked about practical difficulties need to be demonstrated, and this is right out of state statute. And what is meant by a practical difficulty is that if an individual proposes to use the property that's in a reasonable manner that's not permitted by the ordinance, that is one item. You look at the plight of the landowner is due to circumstances unique to the property. Those are typically physical characteristics of the property itself. If granted, the variance will not alter the essential character of the area. And then economic considerations alone do not constitute practical difficulty. So that's what the statute calls for in looking at practical difficulties. In addition to that, the City Council adopted a variance guideline policy a number of years ago, and that is attached. We did one for both variances that are being requested, and that's to be a guide to help Planning Commission and Council evaluate variance applications so that the evaluation part is consistent. In terms of the application itself, for the landscape variance, what they're proposing is they're requesting a variance to allow them to put in 151 shrubs versus the ordinance would require 744 shrubs. That's a lot of shrubs. And primarily due to this is because the site is so large and it has a large area of open space. Shrubs are required based on open space, and there is a formula with that. This formula has worked well. It's been in place for a number of years. We have other large sites that have used this, and it's worked out fine. Fairview, for instance, Park Nicollet, some of those sites. However, when you have an area that you have a lot of open space, like this one, where your building envelope is more limited, it's a lot of various shrubs. So what we did in the evaluation of this is took a look. The areas that are available for planting are the steep slopes primarily, and then the areas that are between the retaining wall and where the curb starts. And when you take a look at the landscape plan, which this is, they are really including landscaping on every part of the site they can, with the exception of right by the retaining walls. That's something that, from a staff perspective, we don't recommend. You have issues not only of potentially having roots and interfering with the retaining walls, but also just the chances or the likelihood of those plants living is really minimum. So we do believe that practical difficulties are present, not due to the property owner, but due to site characteristics. The other part would be you do have a large area of open green space, if you will, but it's all steep slope. And again, the intent would be not to dig within these steep slope areas because we want to retain these slopes as opposed to doing anything that's going to cause any erosion. With that, combined with the policy, when we took a look at that, we had 12 positives, 2 negatives, and then 5 of the 19 items were not applicable. All of these things together, including the landscaping, we do believe that practical difficulty is demonstrated for the landscape variance they're requesting. In terms of proposed signage, the building is a very large building. Their proposed wall signage is minimal, basically single raised lettering. Certainly, they have the ability to do quite a bit of additional signage other than what is shown on the plans. Because it's a multi-tenant building, we've added a condition that they provide a comprehensive sign plan where the building owner basically sets forth the parameters for signage for their tenants, and then the city, we will issue permits based on that. It's a standard condition. The other item is related to the freestanding sign that's proposed. That sign, again, no issues in terms of the sign itself. It's basically 10 feet wide by 12 feet tall. The issue is with regard to the setback itself. And this shows where the sign is proposed. This would be the front property line here. Basically, there's only about a 1 foot setback that's shown there. And then there is another requirement that you need to be 5 feet from the driveway or closest parking stall. And they're about 3 feet. With the height of this sign, the setback should be 11 feet from that front property line. They're proposing 1 foot. What we did in taking a look at the policy and applying those, again, we found 3 positives, 7 negatives. 9 of the items just are not applicable to this type of an application. What we did note, however, is that there is a site that the sign could be placed without needing a variance. And if that's possible, then there really is, it's hard to demonstrate practical difficulty. There may be room on this site. We just did not have the level of plans to be able to show that. But if they could demonstrate that it meets the setbacks, staff would have no issues with that variance. Or excuse me, with locating the sign at that location. So the recommendations are, we are recommending approval of the conditional use permit for the retaining wall and height of the building. And then we are recommending to deny the sign setback variance because we do not believe there's practical difficulty that's been demonstrated, and there's an opportunity to put the sign in a location that meets the ordinance and still will accomplish the same objectives. In terms of the landscape standards for the deviation to allow fewer shrubs, we do feel that the applicant meets the practical difficulties, and we're recommending approval of that, subject to the 14 conditions outlined. And those are, I will just summarize, we're looking for the 2 parcels to be combined into 1 lot, a safety fence to be installed everywhere along the retaining walls. It's over 5 feet tight. The overhead power line matter to be resolved with the utility company, either the line to be relocated within the easement or a new easement provided, and written documentation from the utility company that they're okay with the plan. There is a standard in the ordinance that requires plant diversity. The standard is set in place so that we can avoid as much as possible situations like emerald ash borer and other things. So the council some number of years ago established a standard that no one plant variety should exceed 25% of the materials. So they do need to make some adjustments to the landscape plant schedule. We don't believe that that will be an issue for them, but they do to meet that 25% species standard. And then also there is a the type of tree that's proposed that is not, does not meet the caliber size requirement, so we are indicating that that should be met. Comprehensive sign plan should be submitted. We talked about that. Freestanding sign should be relocated to meet the setbacks. And then as far as the engineering is involved with it, there are a number of things. They will need a low-impact development agreement that will need to be signed. Also, a national pollution discharge permit will need to be provided to the city. A permit to work in local right-of-way is a city permit that will be needed. And then also the outstanding conditions in the city engineer memo that we attached to the application. 11 is requirement from MnDOT, both 11 and 12, one related to showing current access control that should be out there, and that they provide to the city documentation that all MnDOT permits have been obtained. Number 13, the Lower Minnesota River Watershed District has requested a copy of their NPDS permit be provided and filed with the Lower Minnesota District. And then the last one would be that the plans be revised to address the fire department items that are indicated in their memo that was attached as well. And with that, I can stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Garros. That was very thorough. So just a little bit of level setting here. I think since we've got some new commissioners, project of this magnitude normally we see as a planned unit development. It's somewhat unique that this is a conditional use permit. Can you, and that changes how we view it as a commission, correct? Can you explain just a little bit of what that difference is for commissioners? Because there's probably not as much engagement on some of the issues that we normally talk about because of that.
Planned unit development is, for lack of a better way to describe it, it's a negotiated zoning district, if you will. It's negotiated between the city council and the property owner or the applicant. And what happens is, in that, the applicant can ask for deviations from the standards of the ordinance, and those are listed in the planned unit development. And then in exchange for those deviations, they need to provide public benefits. And those items are identified in the ordinance, but can consist of any number of things. When the planned unit development is ultimately approved, there is an agreement that sets forth all of the items, and the plans that are approved as part of that project become part of that planned unit development zone. So instead of looking at the ordinance, finding a standard commercial district that the property might be located in, instead you need to go to the planned unit development agreement. So in those cases, because that there's give and take in those, the city can request higher standards in terms of, providing for the deviations that are being requested. Most of our projects, quite frankly, are planned unit developments, and we have very few that are not, so this is a unique situation.
Thank you. I've got a couple questions on some of the details. So the shrub issue, I have to say that the number just stood out. I just can't imagine 744 shrub. Is that, I think you explained that, but is that just by nature of this being a very large, it's a very large building, it's a very large footprint?
Large size and the amount of green space, the amount of open space. What staff is suggesting, we believe that it's excessive as well. Like I say, some other applications for similar sized properties, it's been fine. But the difference seems to be when you have a large amount of green area available and you apply that standard, that it's really high. What staff is suggesting is that we bring that back to Planning Commission as part of your work plan for 2020 and take a look at that and come up with something that is, I think, more reasonable for this type of situation.
And then my second question is about the safety fence. Is that do we have standards for that? Is it spelled out what a safety fence is?
We do not have specific standards. Again, they're usually planned unit developments that we work with. So typically, in those cases, we have required like vinyl coated chain link or decorative type, black metal fencing of some sort, can be aluminum. But because this is not a PUD, all we had indicated is the safety fence. Safety fence is generally recommended by the engineering department when we have situations, especially where you have people that are getting in and out of vehicles or people walking in close proximity to where these taller retaining walls are.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, questions for Ms. Garros?
Yeah.
Commissioner Roberts?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you go back to the slide with the 14 things, please?
Yes.
Just to piggyback, so 5 feet is acceptable compared to like a deck,
For
a fence, you know? Because a railing on a deck is a lot less than that.
fences, in terms of the height, two different things.
You were talking about, when it reaches 5 feet of the retaining wall, you're gonna put a fence up.
Yes, that's generally what we've done.
Okay, so 5 feet is acceptable as a drop for,
Generally
staff.
not applied it to anything lesser than 5 feet. It's usually been 5 feet and taller.
I'm just curious.
Not a hard
Okay.
and fast, but
Yep.
generally in the
You're on a slope,
application.
it's not a straight, yeah, I can understand that, okay, just checking. The other thing was, in regards to number 5, the submitting, the sign purpose prior to, is that something that is gonna come back to us once they submit that, or is that something just going to staff?
That would just come to staff.
Okay, so we
what they
won't
would
have
do-
to see that again,
Nope,
okay.
nope.
Additional questions? Commissioner Timmerman?
Deb, I have questions about the sight lines. Can you go back to the slide that showed the sight lines and kind of talk me through what angle we were looking at that from?
Yes. So this, to the upper right, so this would be looking at if you were in the circle, for River Ridge Circle. The way that we calculate those based on the ordinance is you go to the far side of the street, someone 6 feet tall, looking back at the building, at what point would they see rooftop equipment? And in this case, when they've done that sightline study, all of their rooftop equipment is gonna be over in this location. And just with the distance and the height of the building, there will not be, none of those units will be visible.
So what kind of, I guess, aerial observations have we done to see what this will look like from 35W? Because this is a pretty prominent property. And my concern is if we're only considering sightlines from the main road, which is what we do, maybe we haven't considered some of the things as far as the people coming south into Burnsville that will be seeing this.
This site is gonna be very similar to the, let's see, we did an application over on Cliff Road, and it's actually across the street from where Walmart is. And it's a situation where you've got the building is up on a hill, and when you look at it, you're quite a bit lower. This is just showing the slopes, if you will, on their subject site and just beyond it. When you get down to the freeway level, you won't be able to see
So you're actually
anything.
looking up the hill.
Exactly.
Okay. And then, if I may, Chair. Sure. The question I have about the water filtration, it looks like that's gathering water on the west side of the property and on the northeast side of the property, but the largest of the slopes are on the north side of the property. What, I guess, mitigation is there that the water won't run off the parking lots, the building, into the neighboring property?
I think I'll let,
Sure, I can answer that, Commissioners. There is curb and gutter being placed on the project, so everything within the paved parking area will remain within that paved parking area. The grading plan routes all the water into storm sewer catch basins that will be routed into that storm sewer ponding system in both cases. So water that does fall outside of the paved area will, remain on the existing slope as it does today, but everything within the impervious areas will be captured.
Great. What about the other 6 months during the year? Where does the snow go?
Well, again, same thing, the snow will be captured within the paved area, now that's a good point, I guess, as far as, snow plowing and things like that, what they're gonna do with their, snow plow procedures and, stockpiling, things like that. If if they were to stockpile it outside of the paved area potentially, then that could, create some sort of problem. I can tell you with this site, they're not gonna have that opportunity. They're gonna have to haul it away, I would imagine. They're not gonna have room within the retaining wall fences to be doing any snow storage. So I would imagine they would either pile it within the site and give up some parking spots or have it hauled off site.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner John?
So from my vantage point and what I see here, it looks like the front of the building actually faces 35W, is that correct?
Yes, the west,
Okay.
correct.
And so as far as aesthetics from the freeway, it looks like they did a really good job of, there's no really ugly side of the building outside of the dock, loading dock, which faces the east side, the opposite side. So I think they did a good job there. My questions are more in regards to safety. With the retaining wall where it is there a distance between the end of the parking lot and where that fence would be, like a curb or something along those lines?
There would be a curb, definitely.
Okay.
There's a curb and then a couple of feet, and then the retaining walls, are sloped, so it would be at the top of the retaining wall that
Okay,
the
so-
fence would be located.
So there is a distance there where
Yes,
more of
and
a
there would be a
safety
stop,
thing.
the curb would stop as far as vehicles, and
Right,
there are also no sidewalks proposed there, but you do have the parking lot, people getting in and out of their vehicles.
exactly, okay. And then as far as the retaining wall being able to hold up I'm assuming that all has been looked at as far as engineering concerns.
Correct. Commissioners, any retaining wall over 4 feet in height has to be designed. The engineers have to submit a design for that, so there will be designs as a part of the construction plans for this project. In the permit process, when it goes to building permit, they will be submitting designs from a certified engineer.
Perfect, that's all I had.
I've got one additional question here. So, the fire department memo, that seemed a little more involved than I've, seen previous fire department memos. Am I right in that? Or do
It is.
do I not read them closely enough?
Well, usually, we have the plans well in advance, and we're able to incorporate those things. This final set of plans was submitted the Friday before
Okay.
this report was due, so we just did not have the opportunity for all the staff to go through the reviews. I was able to do that for the planning items, but we have consultants and our fire staff, and they
Right.
were not able, so we just included those attachments as the conditions then.
Okay, so
But you are
there's-
correct, typically, we do not include those.
There's nothing unusual in there because of the site, or, I mean, it all,
No.
some of it didn't actually make sense to me, because I'm not a fire engineer, but, okay, additional questions? Commissioner John?
I'm sorry, I have one more. Do we know why they want the sign placed where it is rather than the location that we were suggesting?
I think it was just proposed, and that's one of the review items that we included. So it's a minor element. It's really just readjusting it. And like I say, they may be able to do that, but they would need to stake it out in the field to make sure they can meet the setbacks.
Okay.
Otherwise, move it to the south side of the driveway.
So there won't be any tears if we say not to do that?
believe so, no.
Okay, good.
Commissioner Henderson?
Yes. First step, very nicely written staff memo. But my questions, in the memo, it said that there's some offices, but I couldn't determine from looking at the plans, I think it was A2, the number of offices.
The offices are really going to be along the outside of the building, if you will. And then they do also include, there's office and associated warehouse with that, but all of the loading docks happen in this location. This is the extent of the floor plan that was provided to us.
Okay.
Perhaps that's something that the applicant can further address for you.
Okay. So just essentially those dashed lines would be the office walls?
Yes.
Okay. And then, you talk about a private water main. What is that?
Oh, yep. There was, let's see here. This is based on when the project had previously been developed. There's a water line that crosses in this location here, which would have served the former site, and that will not be utilized. They'll be bringing in sewer and water from this location. They are gonna look at televising part of the existing sewer in this location to see if they can use it or not. But at this point, that's not known. But that's what I was referring to in terms of that private water line.
So does that private mean that it only goes to that site? or-
It just serves, yes,
Okay.
that site. It's
Okay.
not serving multiple sites.
So, and it's still city water?
Yes.
Okay.
Interesting.
Then, I found it very interesting that there were power lines out of the easement. Does that happen often, and why did it happen, and what if NSP says no? What happens?
It happens all the time.
Okay.
You would hope that it wouldn't, but it does, especially on properties such as this. You know, the utility companies, you know, will go in and they'll put the lines in, and they've been there forever. In terms of, I don't know for legal counsel, but there may be an argument for prescriptive easements. What we try to do when we're looking at projects is to clean those up to the extent possible. At minimum, we would require the utility company to provide a letter indicating their support or not support. And then if they want to have the line relocated or an additional easement, that's something that the applicant would need to do.
Okay, so then if it is an additional easement, that means that that property owner would have to give up part of their land because they couldn't build on it because of that easement?
Correct.
Okay,
Or they could relocate the line to be within the easement.
okay. Let's see. On A1, it says the trash and recycling bin. I just saw an arrow going out towards one of the bays. It's one of those in the middle column, tiny, tiny writing. Does each bay have their own trash and recycling, or is it gonna be one
As
thing
I
for the
under-
whole building?
As I understand it, Commissioner, is that there will be one for each of the tenant
Okay,
spaces. Yeah,
okay.
and it
Additional,
will be inside, so no
Oh,
outside
okay.
trash enclosures.
Okay, good, thank you.
additional questions for Ms. Garros? Commissioner Timmerman?
I have a question on the increased traffic that will be on the road there. We talked about this particular road with Dar es Salaam and some parking concerns, and specifically some safety concerns with more children being there with the religious institution, with Skateville right across the street. What are we looking at as far as increased volume of trucks? And do we need to look at a traffic study here?
Commissioners, we did evaluate the traffic, again, because of the nature of the business, we did not, I mean, if the ADTs that will be, increased are nothing alarming, not for what it is zoned for in that area, so, we did not feel the need for a traffic study. If that's something that there is a major concern about, we could truly bring that forward to the applicant. Again, we did have our traffic folks look at it. We don't feel there's a need for that. Again, with the type of business, the ADTs will be somewhat spread out. There won't be any type of peak movements that would cause any alarm for that. So I think, and again, it fits within the zoning, so.
Any more questions for Ms. Garros, or should we have the applicant come forward? Is the applicant here? Our representative, if you'd like to come forward and introduce yourself. If there's anything we've said in this discussion that you want to supplement or add some
Sure.
comments to, feel free.
Yes, Ms. Garris did a great job. I'm Kevin Argo with Industrial Equities, and John Allen, the owner, could not be here tonight, but he just wanted me to come down here and be present and to assure everybody that this is going to be a first-class industrial building. For the sector that it's in, light industrial, you can see the materials that we're going to use. There's going to be a lot of glass, there's going to be Casota stone, there's going to be brick, and we just completed a building in Fridley that faces 694, and that turned out very well. So we're very well aware of where it's located and the need for it to look good. His name is on it, and I just wanted to assure you that that will be what we do. And answer any questions if I can. If not, get answers for you and get back to you.
Let me ask specifically about the sign issue. The staff recommendation is not to grant the variance because it doesn't meet the requirements of the am I saying that right, of the ordinance? What is the, I mean, what's your view? Does that create any issues?
No,
from
it
an
doesn't. We talked about it today, and because of what they need, we'll just move the sign to accommodate what we need to do for it.
Okay. Questions for the applicant? We're good. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
I think then we will open the public hearing at 7:20 PM. If there's anybody that would like to speak on this, please come forward and identify yourself for the record. All right, seeing none, we will close the public hearing. Commissioners, what is your pleasure? Discussion or stand for motion? Who wants to start? Commissioner Roberts looks very studious.
Yeah, that's fine.
He's got his glasses on.
This is a long one. I'd like to move to make a motion that staff recommends that the planning commission recommend to the city council approval of the CUP for retaining wall building height above ordinance standards. And actually, we have to look at that, don't we? Do we have to reword this at all?
No.
We can do it just as, okay, standards. And to deny the sign setback variance and approve the variance to the landscape standards, subject to the following 14 conditions that are written. Thank you.
Got a motion? Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been seconded. Any discussion? I want to just, I think this, I know this is a challenging piece of property, and obviously it's very visible for our community, and we appreciate the applicant's interest. And I know this is this office warehouse kind of property, facilities, is something we are in dire need of in Burnsville. So I think it fills a valuable niche there. So I appreciate that. I think it's a good project. So additional comments from commissioners? Commissioner Roberts.
Yeah, I know there were concerns about the sign. And for you to accept the fact that the practical change will come into play takes a lot of question out of our mind, so that helps a lot. And I do love the look of the building. We're in a position where we're really looking at designing this beautiful 35 entryway and exitway out of Burnsville, and having a building that looks like that when you come in from the north or south will look really good. Yeah.
And one more follow-up. I think because of that, there's probably heightened scrutiny in terms of building materials and that sort of thing. I think you addressed much of that, and that was partially why I asked the CUP question as well, because I do think many times we have kind of give and take on the appearance of stuff and so forth, which I think we're somewhat limited in because of the way the land is, because this is a CUP request. So with that, are we ready to move to a vote?
Yes.
Or does anybody else have additional comments? All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And that will be on the city council agenda
July 16th.
July 16th at 5:30 PM. They meet earlier, so they're a little more challenging. Okay, that moves us to the next item, which is a public hearing for Prime Security Bank for a preliminary and final plat of a one-lot commercial subdivision to be known as Burnsville Land Addition at the property located at 13500 County Road 11, north of 13600 County Road 11. Ms. Garros, you are back.
Thank you, commissioners and folks out in the audience. What we're looking at this evening is just a preliminary and final plat. So in terms of review, really the only standards for platting are that you meet the ordinance requirements, primarily the subdivision ordinance, not anywhere near as extensive as your last application or typically the applications we review. With this, the subject site has never been platted before. All of the area basically to the south and to the west was once owned by the utility company out there, Dakota Electric. Back in the 70s, the city and Dakota Electric worked together, and the city acquired and platted the maintenance building site, which is just to the west of this. And then later on, the properties to the south were platted, and this used to be a PDQ site on the south side of 137th Street. So this site is just zoned B3, our general business, not part of any planned unit development like the other properties are to the south. In terms of existing conditions, I just want to note to the left is north, if you will. The site has never had any buildings on it. The property has an exception piece. There have been several pieces that have been taken out of this site over the years to accommodate MnDOT and I-35E. This is the off-ramp off of I-35E to County Road 11. So there's this piece and some additional land that's been acquired. In addition to that, there are some existing easements that also encumber the property onto the north, approximately, I believe, 30 feet wide, but there are two different power line and I believe they're both power line, one's underline and one's overhead power lines. So there's an easement in that location. Something that's somewhat unique about this is that when this area was looked at and the other plats approved, instead of having public access be brought directly to the site, there was a 33-foot easement that was provided, oops, sorry about that, that was provided over the over the east part of this site. This is there's a vet clinic that's here, that's been here for a lot of years. And they have met with the owner of this site, the applicant has, and the owner has indicated his willingness to participate and to assist with the development of this piece as long as there are the appropriate maintenance agreements put into place and cost arrangements, et cetera. We don't have anything formal on that agreement. We just have an email indicating their interest. So that is somewhat different. Also, this site, even though it fronts on County Road 11 to the east and then this MnDOT right-of-way, it really doesn't have any public access, if you will. Access is to be provided, dang it, along 137th Street to the south. And this is the access that when you pull in, you can pull into the city's maintenance facility. So that's where that site is. So this easement was put into place a number of years ago. Later then, the plat for James Plaza was approved by the city. And later than that, we have this easement. So what the proposal is at this point is to not use this easement, but to work with the property owner to the south and provide a different easement through the middle of their parking lot, and then to access the site from the south. This is the James Plaza plat. As I had indicated, you have 137th Street, which was platted at this point, and then this is where the vet clinic is. But there's no access that was provided on the plat, so that it's got just a quitclaim deed that was provided and later turned into an access easement. The preliminary plat meets the requirements, meets the city code. It's a large site, again, a little over 1 acre. The lot area requirements for a B3 general business zone lot is 20,000 square feet, so it's quite a bit larger than the minimum. The width is 100 feet, and it again is much wider than that. The issue that we have, it's kind of a double-edged sword. You want to, when you're platting property, make sure that you can show the building envelope and that it can be developed. However, in this case, there are a number of conditions and issues where the proposed site plan really is questionable because of several unknowns. One of the primary unknowns is that in between where this parking lot ends and the property line to the subject site, you've got an extremely steep slope area here. And in order to access this site, whether they were to use this easement in this location or what they propose here, there's going to need to be a pretty significant cut into that hill and to be able to provide the access. In addition to that, that will likely require a conditional use permit again for higher retaining walls. And then possibly there may need to be some variances involved as well. So at this point, the applicant is just platting. They're seeking to plat the property so that they can market it and sell it to someone else. So while they have provided a site plan, we have some issues with the site plan. We have no issues with the plat as proposed. The preliminary and final plat meet all of the ordinance standards, if you will. This would be, we provided this with your application. It's a 24-foot access easement. Again, it's showing it going right in between the parking lot here to access this site. And the final plat does provide all of the drainage and utility easements that are required by the ordinance adjacent to the property lines. And they do continue to show these existing easements for the utilities on the north part of the site. The issues that we have in terms of the site plan really are related to, you have a different property owner here, and we don't have any agreements in place that, they agree to allow this. They have indicated via an email that they're willing to support it, but we don't have anything in place at this point in time. And we do know that this property owner, not the owner of this site, but this property owner is going to have to come through with a conditional use permit for those retaining walls in order to access the site, at least as shown here. Also, what they're showing is a stormwater pond to be located in the southern part of the site, and then basically coming up with their driveway into the parking lot, and then this would be the building that's shown in this location. Another issue with this, and that has been an issue with the properties to the south, is that just the way that this was platted and then with this easement here, the width or the depth, if you will, of this lot is fairly narrow. Now, it far exceeds the ordinance standard, but when you look at developing, putting in a building and the parking and access, especially with that steep slope, it's a challenge. So we have a different property owner here. We have applications that we don't have before us and can't have before us. And even if we did have them, we could not tie a future city council to approving something that is not part of an application. So those are the elements associated with the site plan. In addition to that, for the building itself, it does make a difference if this is a single tenant or a multi-tenant building. For a multi-tenant retail type building, if that's what is proposed, which would be what's similar to on the two lots to the south, the setback, there's a 60-foot setback to the building from all property lines, and they would have difficulty meeting that and providing the parking. Now, if it's a single tenant building, the setbacks as shown are fine. So it just is a matter of what actually would be proposed and kind of the unknown that we have. And this is just further identifying, again, where these retaining walls would be. They're showing fencing, for safety purposes for that. And then the setbacks are shown and also the easements. For the project also, in order to provide utility services and stormwater, they do need to actually provide for those services off-site. These can be done because the city owns this property to the south. And what is shown would be there is an existing drainage and utility easement within this plat of James Plaza, but additional easements would be needed from the city in order to install these utilities off-site. In terms of the tree preservation, the applicant did provide woodland evaluation information. There are 55 trees on site. They have a little over almost $21,000 in tree value. You can, in this zone, remove up to 60% of the tree value before you have to put in new trees for reforestation. What they would need in the future is when an applicant has a building on a site plan that they want to proceed with, they will actually need to go out and survey where those trees are located, show it on the survey, and then provide the woodland preservation worksheets, get their tree removal permit, and then securities may or may not be provided depending on the extent of their removals. In terms of landscaping, there are somewhat different standards. In the subdivision ordinance, we do require 2 front yard trees to be located on each front yard. In this case, there are actually 2 front yards, the one adjacent to the MnDOT right-of-way and then adjacent to County Road 11. And so there'd be a total of 4 subdivision trees that would need to be provided, and those would most likely be planted at the time of development or before final occupancy for that. Very minimal. That standard comes into play much more when you're dealing with residential lots, but shows you the difference too, I guess, between our zoning ordinance when we're dealing with, an application like we just had in a plat for the same zoning district. So things to look at. In terms of engineering items, the engineer will need to have a full civil plans prepared before they will be able to actually issue building permits for this. And again, this gets into specifics, how the site would specifically be developed. There is a stormwater proposed, so at a future date, if that stays in, they will need to provide final design plans for that. There'll also need to be a stormwater management agreement, and that's also called a LID agreement, or Low Impact Development Agreement. And that just provides that the applicant will continue to maintain that system as planned. And then all required easements would be required, and a future applicant would be responsible to draft those easements, like for the utilities over the city property, and provide that. The development fees due, these are associated with platting property, and these are standard fees. So in total, there would be $32,846 plus dollars associated with the project, and these would need to be paid prior to us releasing the final plat to be recorded. That's very standard. Again, similar to our last application, this national pollution discharge permit's required. They'll need a city right-of-way permit because of the access to 137th Street. And also Dakota County may have some permits that are needed. And then for MnDOT, they're indicating a drainage permit is also needed. In this case, we did again include the fire department memo. This is something that we included it because it's pretty specific. The issue being that they need a 26-foot wide access road, and the plan now shows 24 feet. So somehow that is going to need to be reconciled with future development. And then paving also needs to support our emergency vehicles, so it's a heavier pavement, very similar to what we saw in the Industrial Equities project for the loading area. We talked about this a little bit, that this is somewhat of an atypical project because we don't actually have someone interested in constructing at this time, but it's just the plat. The plat meets the ordinance. The applicant had to provide some type of a site plan, and it's kind of a spec plan to show that it is possible. We do believe it's possible, but we can't recommend approving the site plan component of it because of all of the unknowns. So there is a building envelope. There is an access easement in place to provide access, and it does meet the ordinance standards for the plat, so we are recommending it be approved. We've talked about the other items, and with that, staff is recommending approval subject to the 16 items in our report. And with that, I can stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gears. Our document actually has 17.
It does. Dang it.
Was there one that was different or a second page on the PowerPoint?
Oh, sorry, there is a 17. Your report is correct. The last one is written documentation that the final plat's been recorded with the county prior to issuing building permits. And that is a standard condition. I apologize for that.
Questions for Ms. Garros? Sounds like this is kind of in the early stages, so.
I just have a quick question.
Commissioner Henderson.
What do you mean by 12 foot of relief? What is that?
That just means in the elevations, there's 12-foot, on the site itself, basically from north to south. It goes down, and then there's another 12-foot drop between, basically the property line and where the parking lot, on the lot to the south
Okay,
starts.
good, thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Awad?
Oh, what happens to the old access easement? If the new access easement is gonna be proposed up the middle of the parking lot?
It's a private easement. They're showing on their plans that the proposal would be to get rid of that easement, but they would need to go through private action to do that. If the easement had been dedicated to the public, then we would have a public hearing to vacate that. But because it's a private easement, that'll just need to be handled between the private property owners.
Question? Commissioner John?
I'm assuming that we need to look at this as a plat, and we can't use any of the questions you had as a site in our discussions at all, correct?
That's what staff is recommending. It is just a plat. It's not a development plan. And like I say, it's kind of a double-edged sword where you have to show that it can physically be developed as a lot, which, those things are in place, but yet the particulars of the site plan are what there are issues with. So we're not recommending approval of the particular site plan at this point. It can be a concept and included with that, but we're recommending as part of the conditions that all of the plat documents just show the building pad itself and then leave it at that at this point in time.
Does it make sense for us to recommend it as a plat if it's not going to pass in site? Or there's got to be a reason we're bringing it up, I suppose. So we are able to discuss it as a full site besides just being the plat, correct?
You can discuss because it was proposed as such. What we're saying is there are so many unknowns and there are issues with the project as proposed that we know of. They did show that it is possible to access the site, and there is the access already in place to get there. How you physically construct it, it probably is still going to require some agreement with the property owner to the south, but it's not required, and we really don't have the applications to be able to, get into those details to discuss that.
Okay.
And with a plat, that's what I was saying earlier, a plat's a little bit different, because you're really looking at, does it meet our lot size requirements? Can a building be put on there meeting setbacks? Yes, if it's a single-tenant building, So those types of things are in place, and it does meet the standards for platting. It's just a site plan most likely is going to have to be reevaluated.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Roberts, did you have?
Yeah, I was just reiterating that, I'm remembering that we are not responsible for who this gets sold to.
Correct.
They need this information, they need this approved, so they can then market it and sell it.
Yes, as a
Because
lot,
we
a
can,
platted
don't
lot.
worry about the rest of this, there's a big list of stuff that needs to happen before anybody can build on it. But for them to sell it, they have to be able to tell somebody, you're ready to go, but there are conditions.
Yes.
So all we're doing today with approving this, and just to clarify all this, would basically, with your recommendations, we're okay just to set this as the preliminary plat and final, and then, but there is nothing in place for anything we're approving for design.
Exactly.
Okay, I want to read, okay, good.
Is the applicant here? Would they like to present, to speak at all? Welcome.
Thank you.
Could you identify yourself for the record, please?
I'm Chris Kubish from Kubish Realty. I'm here on the behalf of the bank, Prime Bank. They've owned this property for about a little close to 10 years. And the biggest problem that they've had in marketing it is pretty much what Bud said. There's so many unknowns to it, but until we can get the next step to find out that there is a possibility. That's why we're in front of you today, just to so we could show other people that it is possible. So, with that being said, that's kind of why we're here with the plat. We know there are obstacles with it, but I think that we can overcome them. Just going to take some time.
And I'm assuming you've seen this, the recommendation on this with the 17 requirements and so forth. Is that, are you're comfortable with those?
Well, there's, again, until we actually have an end tenant,
Right.
you know, we're overlooking it, you know.
Yep. Okay. Any questions for the applicant? Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, Commissioner John. Sorry.
So when you do go to sell it, are you going to advertise that these issues do exist? Or
Yes,
is-
I
okay,
mean, we have
okay,
to have full disclosure
Right.
of the obstacles that need to be addressed.
okay.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much.
All right, thank
We
you.
will now open the public hearing at 7:44 PM. If there's anybody who'd like to speak to this, please come forward and identify yourself for the record. Seeing none, we will close the public hearing at 7:45. Commissioners, comments, discussion, questions, motion? Commissioner Roberts.
Being a person that drives by that area multiple times, it's kind of an eyesore now. It'd be nice to have something put in place that will be workable for everybody. And reading the comments from your or the neighbors that are, the doctor that owns the place, I mean, everybody's up for having something happen. Again, a lot of rules are in place, but the right person comes along that wants to do something, it could look really good. I was happy to see something's gonna happen there.
Commissioner Timmerman.
Yeah, I just wanted to say the same thing. That's right in my neighborhood, and I drive past it several times a day. I see the property there, and, I mean, you can tell just looking at it, it's a difficult piece of property. But I think that we're also, you know, we're on the border of another city as well. So we have the opportunity to not only pull in Burnsville residents, but Apple Valley residents to whatever does end up building there. And I think that could be a draw, as well as the proximity to the freeway. So I wish you the best of luck.
Additional comments, or I would entertain a motion. Commissioner Roberts.
I move that staff, I gotta go to this one. Yeah, I move that the planning commission recommend to the city council approval of the preliminary plat and final plat of Burnsville Land Addition, subject to the following 17 conditions as they are written.
Got a motion, is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Additional comments? If not, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. I'll go to city council then on July 16th. And I'll talk to you.
Thank you very much. You said July 16th, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
5:30.
I can never remember that date. All right, that brings us to item 7, which is the application of Mary Mother of the Church for a conditional use permit amendment to accommodate a parochial high school within their existing building located at 3333 Cliff Road. Ms. Arnold.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. So the application before you tonight is a conditional use permit amendment for the use of a parochial high school at an existing location, as Chair Walter described. So the Mary Mother of the Church currently operates under their existing conditional use permit for religious assembly, and this would be an amendment to their land use for this new use to be incorporated. So in the R1 single-family residential zoning district, a parochial school is listed as a separate use from the religious assembly. So the existing conditional use permit was approved in 1968 and then amended for an expansion in 1988, and the property is unplatted. The Mary Mother location is surrounded kind of in the middle of, it's off of Cliff Road, a major road, but it's also surrounded by some residential neighborhoods, some townhomes to the west, and residential to the north and the south of the property, with some more commercial areas across the line into Egan. So the proposed Catholic high school will operate within Mary Mother of the Church's existing classroom space in their building. So it's not utilized during the week. The school intends to function under the traditional school year calendar and schedule. The organization will use space on the upper level of the building for their classroom space, and then lunchroom space on the lower level of the building. No lunch service is going to be provided to the school, no program provided. It's expected that students would bring this from home. The applicant has also indicated that busing services are not proposed as a function of the proposed high school, and that students will be dropped off and picked up by their parents at an existing drop-off area that Mary Mother has at their lower level parking lot. So within its first year of operation, it would be only a ninth grade freshman class at the school, with the intent to add a new freshman class each year until the school reaches the full 4 grades of a high school. So there is no exterior work or construction proposed as part of this application. Under the zoning code, the parochial school use requires the conditional use permit amendment, as it is a separate use, and it's going to be utilized by a separate entity within the building, leasing space to the school. Under the building code, additional use and occupancy standards will not apply until a 100 student count or occupant load has been reached. Under the building code, the school use would be accessory to the church use until that 100 students. Under the zoning code, it's a separate entity within the building, so it is a separate use. So there's kind of 2 uses that were talked about here in the review of this application. So conditions have been added to the CUP for it to be further amended at the point that it reaches the 100 student occupant load, or after 3 years, whichever is later, giving the applicant time. Whether they're currently proposing 25 students per year, so the 3 years could potentially be right before the senior class is incoming, where the organization may have a better idea of knowing whether Mary Mother may be a permanent location for their school or not. Or when it reaches 100 students, as at that time the building code would potentially cause the incorporation of new requirements within the existing building to meet some fire code possible changes. So as the school proposes this new 9th grade class each year, the likeliness of students driving and parking themselves on site increases, and the study of parking and access would be further evaluated with this additional review or conditional use permit amendment in the future, just evaluated in more depth than within this application. The proposal for the parochial high school in the R1 district, it's a conditional use. So within our ordinance, a neighborhood meeting was held as part of this application, in which a representative from the neighborhood organization to the south attended and was supportive of the proposal and expressed a good relationship with the existing use of the church and excitement for the new school use. Because the use will be operating within the existing building, there would be minimal neighborhood impact, as there's no interior or exterior changes proposed at this time, also minimal impacts. So staff is supportive of the application. We're recommending the Planning Commission recommend approval of the conditional use permit amendment, subject to 3 conditions. So the conditions of previously approved conditional use permits remain in force and effect, as I said. So there was an existing conditional use permit that they are operating under further religious assembly use. A plat will be required at the time that there is an expansion or addition to the building. So at this time, the property is unplatted. This would be required for the intensification of the land use at a further time, and then the conditional use permit shall be further amended at such time that a 100 student enrollment has been reached, or after July 16th, 2022, 3 years, whichever is later. So this is a public hearing, and I can stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Arnold. My question, you were very careful to point out the lunch service point. If they did have a lunch service, does that trigger something different?
Not for us, but it may for the building code or other state codes, not the zoning code.
Okay, okay, interesting. Additional questions for Ms. Arnold? Commissioner John.
My question is on staff recommendation number 3, said the conditional use permit shall be furthered, oh, it hurt my eyes, at such time that 100 student enrollment has been reached, or after July 16th, 2022, whichever is later. I feel like it should be something that would be earlier, right, whichever comes first?
So there was some correspondence with the applicant team, and staff is proposing this date, whichever is later, in order to be, for example, if the enrollment hits 100 maybe within the second year, that they would have more time. Maybe at that year two, they don't know if Mary Mother is going to be their permanent home or not for this new proposed high school, but to give a little bit more time for them. Or for the opposite, if they reach that date and their enrollment counts are low, that we can wait to review parking and access at a further and more detail, while they would still meet the building code at the time that they hit 100, but that we could wait.
What if it
For the
happens
traffic
earlier?
impacts.
What if the 100 people come in earlier? What
Then-
if this is a big thing?
Then it would be the 3 years before the senior class begins, before there's 3 years of students that are
Right,
driving and potentially driving and parking, as right now they're just proposing drop-off.
Okay, I guess my only thought with that is the traffic going through that area. People getting dropped off, et cetera. If there's a lot of students coming through, and it's not a big deal. I was just curious on if that is looked at all.
So it would be looked at in more depth in the future. As it currently stands, this would be opposite hours from the existing church use. The existing church use, there's currently 538 existing parking stalls that are utilized by people that are attending the church on the weekend services. So the existing site has the capacity for movement of vehicles and parking of vehicles at this time, but the different hours would be looked at for during the week for further review at a further amendment of the permit.
Okay.
Commissioner Timmerman?
Just to kind of play off of that, Commissioner John, I can tell you have an interest in the safety of what's happening in our community, and my thoughts were kind of in that same area. What type of extracurricular activities will be happening at this facility, and will that bring in buses, children from other schools, and have a traffic impact that may not have been considered?
So the applicant may be able to speak better to that for extracurriculars that may be associated specifically with the school use. Mary Mother utilizes their space in the evenings for various groups throughout the year. And that was not seen to be an issue in impacting with this use. But if the applicant would like to speak to that later, they'll have the opportunity.
Additional questions? Yeah, is the applicant here? Would they like to, if you'd like to come up and introduce yourself, and if there's anything we've discussed that you'd like to add to, feel free to do that, and we'll throw some questions at you.
Sure, thank you. My name is Tom Bankston. I'm really the lead volunteer on this project, and very pleased to have an opportunity to address this group tonight. And we're very excited about being in Burnsville. There's a great need for a Catholic high school in this part of the Twin Cities metro area, so we're very excited about pursuing this and the partnership with Mary Mother of the Church. There was a question about the extracurriculars. We will have, all of the extracurriculars will be parent-led, so we will look at what the students want and we will develop programs around that. There's really no budget for coaches or an athletic director or anything like that. But if there are volunteers who want to fill those roles, we will absolutely work with those parents to make those kinds of things happen. So some of the things that you might associate with a high school, like football games or baseball games or even basketball games, will not be happening on that site. The site does not have a gymnasium. We do hope to be able to offer basketball, but we will have to partner with another school. We do think there are some middle schools available that would have some gym time that we could rent. But the only thing that there might be is there is a field available, a grassy field, which would be suitable for soccer. Certainly running around the campus would be a good cross-country route, so we're kind of planning on that. But that's really it. And I'd be happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Additional questions?
Yes, sir.
Commissioner John?
Can I ask where you are with enrollment right now, or?
Yes, absolutely. We have 16 students enrolled. So, that some people might say that number is small. I can tell you that that is a very good number for a startup school that doesn't exist. It's a very grassroots, parent-led effort. I was involved with a high school startup in St. Louis Park in 2008. In our first year, we had 10 students. And that school has 170 students today. So we're taking the long view on this, and a modest start, I think, is great. We can grow into our space, grow into our work, And I think eventually it should be a really great community.
Additional questions? All right, thank you very much.
Can I make
Yep,
one comment?
absolutely.
So the question did come up about this 100 student versus 200 students and when we might reapply for the CUP. So just to provide a little thought about what went into the 200 students. So for us, we're really trying to make a decision about what's the best long-term home for this school. Now, we want to be in the South Metro. We love Burnsville. We're very grateful to Mary Mother of the Church for making this facility a possibility. And it's a great space, without question, to incubate a brand new school. But having done this before, I can tell that you really do need more than 100 students. You really need closer to 200 before you can make a decision to make a long-term commitment to a property. And as you know, when we file again, it should be so fortunate, there is a considerable expense that goes with that. This is totally a nonprofit deal. Everything is run on donations. So I have to watch every dollar. So it would be disappointing if we had to file for that CUP prematurely and then end up having to move anyway 1 or 2 years later. So I just feel like if we got to the point where we had 190 students or something like that, that would be 2 classrooms per grade. With that kind of, with the plan fleshed out to that degree, I feel confident we could make a solid long-term decision as to whether Mary Mother is an appropriate long-term home or whether we should be looking elsewhere. But with 100 students, I don't believe that we could make that decision, and so I feel like we would be rushed into making a decision, or we would make a decision and then have to move, and we would have spent a lot of money on something that didn't go anywhere, which I don't think would be fruitful for either us or the city. So,
Great. Additional comments off of that? Yeah, Commissioner.
Yes, sir. You're talking about 200 students, and this, the condition here is 100 students. Is that right? Okay.
yes.
Yeah,
So what I'm saying is that when I wrote the application, I put in the 200.
Oh,
The staff has recommended that we go with 100. We had a very good dialogue about that, but I just wanted you to know kind of where we were coming from.
I understand.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I will open the public hearing then at 8:01 PM. If there's anyone who would like to come and speak, please come forward and introduce yourself. All right, seeing none, we will close the public hearing at 8:02. We're rounding up. Commissioners, comments, additional questions? Commissioner Awad.
My comment is, it seems like a great use for the classrooms in Mary Mother that are empty, 5 days a week. It seems like a really good fit. So.
Additional comments? I would agree. I think I've seen some of the media coverage about this. I appreciate your considering Burnsville as for this, and I think you're right. The use of facilities that might not be used during the school day, I think, is a good use. Additional questions, comments, or I would stand for a motion. Commissioner Timmerman.
I'm just curious what the commission's thoughts are on the 100 student enrollment. I appreciate the comments that you had, but I think the explanation that our presenter gave was very valid too. And so I'm wondering, maybe if the city could just describe a little bit what went into that, a little bit more, and maybe the commission can discuss the flexibility in that number.
So staff, because of the statutory requirement within the building code of 100 students changing the building code occupancy and requiring upgrades, potential upgrades to the interior of the building, some related to mechanical equipment, fire code, exiting strategies, and things such as that. That's why staff remained at the 100 student enrollment cap, because that would give us a statutory time where we would already be reviewing plans for the property and for the building, and to keep that as a requirement, so that we maybe aren't frequently checking in on enrollment, and just to give us that statutory requirement of a number.
Can so the wording of that though, so say they would reach 101 in 2020. This says that it doesn't have to be amended until 2022, right? So it's still
So the conditional use permit would not have to be amended until 2022. That would give us a firm date again to which we would be reviewing a new application. The building code by statute would
Okay,
still
so it's
have
two
to be
different- okay,
complied with.
Sorry, I was morphing the two together.
So can I ask a
Commissioner
follow-up on
Timmerman,
that?
yes.
So, I mean, really, we're kind of trying to have it both ways here, it sounds like, where if they want over 100, they would have to comply with the building code. And once they get over 100, which could be in 2020, they will have to comply with the building code. Is that correct?
Yes.
Commissioner John?
Is there going to be, it's going to become a school zone, correct? So the speed limit in that area would have to decrease during school hours or because of a high school?
That would maybe need to be looked at with our engineering staff.
Okay.
That was not part of their review into this application at this time.
Again, safety concerns is all I have on that.
Additional comments?
Can I ask a question of the
Commissioner
applicant?
Timmerman? Absolutely.
Do you mind? Thank you.
Welcome back.
Of course.
Getting your steps in today.
So the way it was described, you would have to comply if you are at 101 students next year.
Right. And so I know where you, and that's absolutely correct, and we've known that all along, that of course we have to comply with building code, we have to comply with the fire marshal. We understand that, and that has always been our intent, regardless of the timing, whether that's in a year or 3 years or 5 years, of course we would do that. I think the issue is that when we apply for a CUP again, it triggers certain things, and for example, the park fee strikes me. I just saw on the previous applicant, $19,600, for park fee, which might apply to us. So that kind of thing makes me nervous. It's really just about the cost and not being put in a situation where we have to make an investment in an application when we don't know for sure if we're going to stay there long term. If we can make a determination that yes, this facility suits the demand and we have what we need here, and figure out something to do with the gym, then we would love to stay. We'd be happy to file for the CUP. But I just feel like at 100 students, we're not really going to know, because that's only one classroom per grade. And really to get a sense for the traffic flow of the students in and out of the building, how the faculty interacts with the students, how the facility is used, how the lounge spaces are used, the lunchroom spaces. I'm just basing this on my own experience, having started this other school. Closer to 200 students is going to give us a way better idea. And it's a pretty big decision because, God willing, we're hoping we're here for a century. It isn't just a 5-year project. So.
Thank you.
Additional comments, thoughts?
So my follow-up
Questions?
comment, if I may.
Yeah, Commissioner Timmerman.
Is that the applicant seems agreeable to meeting all of the requirements as they stand by state statute and other zoning requirements and other regulations that they need to follow. And it seems like they have a good idea of what those are. So to me, I would like to see this expanded to what was originally requested by the applicant.
So that would involve just the third condition?
It would
Or-
change the third condition to 200 students rather than 100 students.
Additional, do you have a comment on that, Ms. Arnold?
If
Thought?
the commission would like to change the condition, that's something that they can work into it. As an aside, so the park dedication fees are associated with a plat application and not a conditional use permit application. So those fees would be at the time of a plat for a property, that those are calculated based on the land use in question.
So that's already been paid probably, right?
The property's not platted
Oh, okay.
at the time that a plat, which would be required when there's an expansion to the building.
So my question, Commissioner Timmerman, so the 200, whichever is later, so then conceivably they could have 198 students and under that go until indefinitely, with it worded as whichever is later.
Frankly, I think it should be whichever is earlier,
Well,
but
yeah, I've been thinking that's, I've read that.
I'm already stepping on staff's toes, and I apologize for that.
Commissioner Roberts?
I see where you're coming from, but I think where you're coming from, the decision needs to be a little bit farther out, not closer in. If the wording is whichever comes first, you all of a sudden take that date and you bring it down to here, and you guys are stuck, because all of a sudden you got a CUP that you've got to redo and pay for and do all this, and you don't even know what you're gonna do then. Whether having it the later is gonna give you for sure that 3 years, and you're gonna have that time to figure this out. Whether you've got 50 students or 500 students at that time, you're gonna know in that 3 years. That's what that later is for, correct? I'm sorry, but.
No. The 3 years means that we will have a minimum of 3 years. So in other words, if we
Right.
reached 100, in the first year, we would still have 3 years. So that 3 years is providing a minimum, which is appreciated.
Yes.
But even then, I'm saying, I'm not really anticipating 100 students in the first 3 years. I do not think that is a realistic, that's not gonna happen.
My understanding was the 100 number was put in for building code, not for his,
It was put in for staff to be able to have a firm date to which we could say now is the time where
Right.
it is appropriate for you to apply for your conditional use permit amendment.
okay.
Commissioner Awad?
So when they get 100 students, then the building code requirements kick in, which will result in a cost for them to modify the building, or at least analyze the building. So, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And that's regardless of what we do, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so if it's 200, it really is, because at 100, you're gonna have to look at that.
Well, there is a difference. I mean, so for example, even on this application, we've had to hire an architecture firm, we've had to hire a separate land survey firm. We're over 10 grand already, and this one was the easy one. So, I mean, again, we're happy to spend that money, because especially if this is gonna be our long-term home or our permanent home, of course we will invest in the site. But I don't wanna be rushed into that decision. And in all honesty, if we have 120 students in year 4, 120 students isn't gonna tell us, it depends on how quickly we get there, we're just going to need more time to be able to see if this is the best long-term home for us. That's really my point. And I think with 100 students, you would always be hoping for more, and we would be marketing for more, and we may or not get them. If we do, then we would know, okay, we've got the capacity here to handle more students, and we will invest in this property. If we have to make a decision based on a smaller number of students with the idea that we could still grow, then I just think we'd be making a decision prematurely. That's it.
Commissioner Henderson?
So, Sarah, between the 100 students or 200 students, is there gonna be an increase in staff time reviewing stuff? Would they have to look at it twice then because of the building code and then again? Or
So at 100 student enrollment, no matter what, when the building is reviewed for building code compliance, there would be a staff review of that, but primarily under the building code, so not necessarily for the zoning of the property at that time. The conditional use permit amendment would be when staff would be reviewing further the access to the site, parking of students, because there would be more students that are of age where they may, instead of being dropped off, maybe parking.
That was my comment when I made the 100, is more towards the building inside, permit of use of that, not the CUP, which would be later.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
and then,
Commissioner
let
Henderson?
me ask, can I ask the applicant? a question?
You absolutely can.
So why 200? Why is that a magic number versus 150
Well,
or
because it's
250 or
sure,
300?
because we're planning on a typical thing to plan for a school is a classroom of 25 students, and that would be 2 classrooms per grade. So that's why we use that. I mean, you know, you may end up with, initially you might have a situation where you've got one classroom for senior class, you know, one for junior class, maybe two for sophomore class, and then who knows, maybe three for freshmen. But until you can really see multiple classrooms per grade, it's not obvious to see how the school is going to function in terms of where the students are, where the faculty is, how they interact and move between classes.
Okay.
So that's why that number was chosen.
Now, is 25 students a typical classroom size?
Well, that's what we're planning on, yes. Like I say, we have 16 students enrolled now. We actually expect 4 or 5 more to enroll before the 1st of September. So we're, you know, this first year we'll have probably 20.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Additional comments or questions? I think, Commissioner Timmerman, you'd asked a question about, earlier about increasing that number. I think I would be amenable to that. 200, I don't know if that's the number though.
Yeah, the predicament is
Split the
that if you set it at 200 with the whichever is later, we may never look at this again.
Right, it could-
For
yeah.
the conditional use. So, for reviewing the conditional use permit, right? Because if they stayed at 150 for the next 10 years, we would never hit that target.
That would be correct, yeah.
So that's why the later or sooner, I think if your number gets higher, I think we need to change it to whichever is sooner. But then that guarantees that at 3 years, you're going to be back here.
Right.
Which hopefully would be a good thing, because you'd have 200 students at that point. Or
yeah.
heading towards it, I'm hoping.
Yeah. I mean, I think that long-term, 200 students is very doable. Just to give you a little, if you'll permit me, just a minute about the demographics. So there are 300 8th graders who graduate every year from a Catholic grade school in the South Metro. That's south of the Minnesota River, south of 494. That's 300. And about 70 of those students currently are remaining in the Catholic education system, going to a 9th grade at either Holy Family in Victoria or Holy Angels in Richfield or St. Thomas or Viz in Mendota Heights. And so that means there are 225 students who are probably going into the public school system, maybe some are being homeschooled. And so out of those 225, we're betting that at least a third of them would go to a Catholic high school if it was appropriately priced and it was conveniently located. So that's actually about 70 kids per grade. So that's 280 students, and I think that's conservative. So the numbers are gonna be substantial over time. But at this point, it's still just a theory, and so you never really know until it actually happens. So that's why if we get to the over 100, 160, 170, and we're clearly heading toward 200, then we're gonna know it makes sense. Whatever move we make, it's gonna be the long-term permanent move, whether that's at Mary Mother or somewhere else, but that will be our permanent move. Right now, we're in the incubation stage. We just need a place to incubate the school.
Commissioner Henderson, go ahead.
What is the capacity of Mary Mother, the church then? Is it 200 students? Because if you're just gonna leave after 200.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I mean, for a couple of reasons, okay? So one is I believe there are about 10 classrooms in the building, so that would be 250. And that's with the existing configuration of the building. There's room to configure and create other classrooms. And also, I mean, I mentioned there's no gym. I mean, long-term, I'm hoping we do build a gym. But that's a whole other discussion, maybe 10 years down the road, at which time we might build classrooms. But, I mean, the land is there. And if the parents wanted that, that might be something we pursue.
Commissioner John?
Let me be Debbie Downer. Let's say you only get 75 students after 3 years. Is there a reason that they would need to come forward to the city again on July 16th, 2022?
Not until they've reached the 100.
No, not unless they reach the 100. So in accordance with how it's set up now, if they don't even reach the 100, they'd still have to, I suppose because it has to hit the 100 after July 6th. Okay, never mind.
That's the buffer I looked at.
Yeah,
Was
I
it
read
gives
through it
them a
3
buffer.
times.
If you're not there in 3 years, but looking at 4 and 5 years being a kicker, something like that, something happens with politics or anything, that gives you a little extra time.
It does.
Yeah, whereas if it says sooner, as
Correct.
soon as it happens. This
Right.
gives you that little bit of buffer. Having the great numbers is not the bad thing. It's having the low numbers at that time.
That is
All of a sudden,
correct.
you gotta spend money for something you don't have.
That's exactly correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
I like that. I just think that I don't know. I still think 150, I'd like to go with what the applicant proposed, to be honest with you. I don't feel like we have enough justification to really change that to the half number of what you've requested. So my vote would be for 200.
With the date the same and the later?
Correct.
Whichever is later, that's what you're saying.
Yes, you had to get me there on that piece.
No, I just, yeah.
Commissioner John,
So let me go back to the traffic.
Debbie Downer.
Yeah, Debbie Downer, that's my new nickname. Cliff Road, Cliff and Cedar is right where this is. And all of a sudden, you have 150 kids driving in there, turning in, dropping kids off, what have you, in the morning and in the evening. So there's the traffic situation. That's why it might need to be looked at sooner than that. I don't know what that magic number is. I don't work in the engineering world, but that's why I would argue that maybe 100 is the right number rather than the 200.
Additional comments, debate, discussion, very vibrant discussion. You use the term incubator, and I like that. I do think, to me, this is a project that has all upside, for the community. I would be open to seeing a higher number and maybe put the date back a couple of years, but make it whichever is sooner. Does that make sense? If I put too many nuances in there?
I follow that.
I mean, my concern is too that we get you 200 is a little high, so that's in terms of, having 175 students, for example, indefinitely. Obviously, that's probably not with the direction of the school necessarily, but your traffic concerns are valid. I don't know. Thoughts on that?
Was there a specific reason this was set out 3 years? Is that a?
So staff discussed amongst themselves and chose 3 years as a suggestion, because it would be the summer before the fourth year of complete enrollment at the school, or complete 4 grades of a high school enrollment.
So these freshmen would start their senior year.
The 3-year was a staff suggestion. We didn't suggest
Right.
it. So.
Yes.
Commissioners, where are we at? I would entertain a motion. I'm just not sure what it is. Commissioner Roberts?
I got a quick question. You can answer this, I'm sure you can. And in the public safety issue in regards to what does it take for us to do a simple survey of traffic at a certain number?
So there is an engineering, that would be related to engineering.
Right.
And they do have a mathematical number for daily trips that would potentially trigger a traffic study. But that's that's a calculation that I do not have.
No, I didn't ask for that, but I'm asking in regards to cost to the city, whatever it might be. It might be a half a day, it might be a couple hours of a guy. I don't know what it's gonna take, but if at a certain number of student enrollment, we decide we're gonna do a traffic study at this point, it gives us our pushback date, but it also gives us a little bit of a magnifying glass on the safety issue of things, which I know there's some concerns here. Or is that totally unreasonable?
That may not be suggested
Okay.
to trigger like a future an action by the city that's not related to a land use application.
Gotcha. That's why I needed your information on that.
Okay.
Okay. I would still entertain a motion.
Chair, how many years were
Commissioner
you
Timmerman.
thinking?
I had 5 in mind, but I don't know.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion.
Commissioner Timmerman?
And before I complete this, I just wanna, well, we're getting close. Yep. We're throwing around the 200 number. Is that reasonable? or is it something in between? I'd like to go with what the applicant proposed, but with 5 years, I think we are in a good range there. And I hope you get to that. I think that would be a great thing for the city.
Can I
Yes.
interrupt your, so are you saying the whichever is later or whichever is sooner?
It's going to be whichever is sooner with 5 years and 200 students.
Oh. Is that a motion?
I'd like to make a motion.
Oh,
that-
sorry, Ms. Garros.
Just to throw something else in there. If the question is, you know, kind of what to look at in terms of, you know, if you start getting kids and the traffic and whatnot, could you, instead of, you know, tying everything to the number of students and years, tie it to the type of parking at such time as they will be providing on-site parking for students to park? As opposed to the drop-off that's, you know, proposed because they're younger students for at least the next 3 years.
That could be done.
Sounds like parking's pretty adequate. When these ninth graders are all of a sudden 16 and they're driving themselves, it sounds like there's 500 and some odd slots available, which totally exceeds the 200 people that may be there if everybody's driving.
2 cars.
Yeah. So I think parking wise is pretty simple. In fact, once those kids start driving, the traffic's, you know, you're not gonna have the in and out anymore. It's gonna be an in, and then it's gonna be an out, so it's gonna be cut down that much more. I looked at that when you said that, and I thought, well, the traffic is obviously not a parking thing anymore. You know, they have enough of that. I think we're trying to make this as easy as we can on you, and then answer a few other simple questions about safety and stuff.
Deb, your concern on the number of students?
Oh,
is
I
more-
just thought, you know, if that was the primary issue, is there a way to look at this and, you know, look at it from, you know, a traffic type standpoint as opposed to just picking a number of students?
Because I thought the point that you made, sir, about, if the number's too low, it forces them to make a decision before they're comfortable making a decision, which I don't know necessarily bodes well for Burnsville, so.
You said you were comfortable at 200.
Yeah, 200 is the number we put in the application. It's the number based on my experience.
That's what I mean.
Having done this before, and
Yeah. For those of us that haven't done this startup, you have.
yes.
Yeah.
Would you
Commissioner Timmerman.
be,
I'm sorry, I keep forgetting her.
Just,
You just keep talking. Commissioner Timmerman.
would you be okay with the 5 years, though?
Yeah,
If we
no, I
say
thought-
5 years,
No, I think that that's reasonable.
whichever sooner.
200 or 5 years, whichever sooner. That gives us 5 years. 5 years, we very well may have the 200 students. So, I mean, I think that seems, I mean, I would be agreeable to that, absolutely.
Okay, Commissioner
I'd like to
Timmerman.
renew my motion to recommend to the city council approval of the conditional use permit amendment to accommodate a parochial high school within their existing building, subject to the following conditions, and amending condition 3 to read 200 students, enrollment that has been reached or after July 16th, 2024, whichever is sooner.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded, and everybody understands what it is. Okay, any additional discussion? All right, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and that will be at the city council on July 16th, 2019 at 5:30 PM. Wow, that was quite exciting. We don't do that very often. But no, thank you very much for, like I said earlier, I think it's, we appreciate your considering Burnsville for this. I think it brings a certain level of excitement, particularly to the Catholic community. I'm Lutheran, but I'm still excited about it. So,
good luck. No, really?
that brings us to the end of our agenda, right? Updates? Ms. Garros.
We have a few updates for you on Wednesday night this week, on the 10th, at 6:30 downstairs. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is going to be having
Yes, I saw that.
a public meeting on the application by Burnsville Sanitary Landfill to expand. So the purpose of the meeting really is to find out from folks what should be included as part of the environmental study. It's gonna, they have like 4 hours. It starts at 6:30 and then I think it goes to 9 or 9:30. There'll be a short presentation at first that's about a half hour long, and then the rest is set aside for public testimony. So the public, anyone is invited to that.
Lots of traffic from Bloomington that day. I would imagine.
I would think so too. Get here early and park early. Yeah, I don't know. In addition to that, we have the 2040 Comprehensive Plan has been finally approved by the Metropolitan Council. So we will be taking that to City Council at their next meeting also. And they need to adopt a resolution before that can be put into place. But everything looks good with that. So a couple, 2-3 years of work, mostly involving the Planning Commission. We'll finally get to being able to implement things. And then we are working on a couple of studies, and they're starting underway. We have a parking study, which is on your Planning Commission work plan, to take a look at parking standards. And we have a consultant in place. We have our first meeting next week, and that should come together rather quickly. So there will be public involvement and then involvement with the commissions and whatnot, but that will be shortly. Also, Regina Dean is working on the TOD, Transportation-Oriented Development, zoning. Thank you.
Transit-oriented development.
Wrong word. Ordinance, and that also will be affecting, Planning Commission will be involved in that, and they're up and running, and starting to work on that. They received a grant from Metropolitan Council also with that. And then, Sarah is working on, with our consultant, WSB, on a City Council work session item from their all-day work session. They wanted to look at our screening requirements, especially in terms of trash enclosures and those types of things, how we relate to other communities, and what those standards are, and perhaps what they should be or should be changed to. So Sarah's working on that. I think with that, that's what we have.
That transit-oriented development ordinance is probably one of our bigger city issues in the next couple of years. But I wanted to just, first of all, welcome our new members. We didn't really do a lot of that at the beginning. Appreciate your willingness to serve on this this commission. We're an easy to deal with bunch, I think, for the most part. And I also want to acknowledge somebody who's not here, Commissioner Benke, Vice Chair, who ended his term on June 30th. We're going to miss him here, I think, in terms of the expertise that he provides and the institutional knowledge as well. So with that, any other updates from members of the commission? I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned at 8:32 p.m.